The glow of my office monitors cast jagged shadows against the walls as the clock slipped past midnight. I stared at the data scrolling across my screens, the forgotten remnants of a third cup of coffee cooling on the desk. Most executives would have passed this kind of work to their IT teams, but I wasn't most executives. Sentinel Security was my brainchild, and if I learned anything from building it from the ground up, it was that vigilance was the price of success. That vigilance led me to an anomaly buried deep within the system logs of one of our top clients, Crestline Developments. At first glance, it was the kind of blip any overworked tech might overlook, a series of logins from the Cayman Islands in the dead of night. I might have dismissed it too, but the credentials tied to those logins weren't random. They belonged to Ethan Shaw, my best friend since college. For a moment, I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. Ethan was always jetting off on business trips or pulling all-nighters for his company Crestline. Odd hours weren't unusual for him. But as I dug deeper, connecting the timestamps to other patterns in the data, the unease in my chest began to grow. Something about this didn't add up. The sound of footsteps down the hall pulled me from my thoughts. Andre Marcus, my head of security, appeared in the doorway, a tablet in hand. A former NSA analyst with a talent for discretion, Andre rarely delivered good news after hours. "You're going to want to see this," he said, his voice low and measured as he stepped into the room. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Let's have it." Andre sat down, swiping through files on his tablet before passing it across the desk. On the screen, a map flickered to life, dotted with locations and timestamps. "It's about Claire," he said carefully. "Her phone has been connecting to a specific Wi-Fi network like clockwork, Wednesdays and Sundays, every week for months. The network belongs to a guest house in downtown Riverview." My stomach tightened as my eyes landed on the address. It wasn't Ethan's home address. It was an exclusive penthouse complex he kept under wraps for business meetings. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tightness in my throat. 6 months at least," Andre replied. "But there's more." He tapped the screen, revealing another set of data, appointments Claire had mentioned attending at a fertility clinic. It was a plausible cover, considering we'd been discussing expanding our family. "Her phone's never connected to the clinic's network," Andre said quietly. "Not once. Instead, the signal's been pinging from the same downtown guest house during those appointments." I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was solving clicking into place. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing against my chest, but I forced myself to focus. "Find out everything," I said. "Property records, surveillance footage. If someone so much as sneezed near that building, I want to know about it." Andre nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Already on it. There's one more thing, though." He swiped to a new screen, showing a pattern of encrypted data bursts originating from Crestline's financial servers during those same time windows. "It's Ethan," I muttered under my breath, my voice a mix of disbelief and anger. Andre didn't respond, his silence confirmation enough. "Full-spectrum surveillance," I ordered, my voice sharper than I intended. "Digital, physical, everything. I want eyes on both of them at all times. And this stays between us." "Understood," Andre said, rising to his feet. As he left, I turned back to my monitors, my reflection staring back at me from the darkened screen. For a moment, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the mouse before pulling up a folder labeled personal. The photos felt like a gut punch. There we were, Claire and I at my parents' anniversary party, arms around each other, smiling like a picture-perfect couple. Ethan was in the background, laughing at some joke I couldn't remember. There was another one, more recent, of Claire and Ethan side by side, their heads close, their laughter private. I closed the folder, my hands shaking as I opened my secure messaging system. The recipient, Rebecca Lane, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on high-profile cases. Message: "Need urgent analysis. Attaching files. Priority: Alpha." The rest of the night passed in a haze. While the world outside carried on as usual, my office became a war room. I pored over every detail, every timestamp, every anomaly. I'd built my career on recognizing patterns, and the pattern forming in front of me now was one I couldn't ignore. If Ethan and Claire thought they could cover their tracks, they'd forgotten the first rule of the digital age. Every action leaves a trace. And I was very, very good at following traces. For most of my life, I've relied on logic. Patterns, probabilities, cause, and effect. They're what led me to build Sentinel Security into one of the most trusted firms in the industry. But logic couldn't prepare me for what I was seeing now. Andre's initial findings weren't just troubling, they were damning. "It's not just the apartment, sir," Andre said as he handed me the latest report. "We've confirmed Claire's been there multiple times over the last 6 months, and we have surveillance footage to back it up. Here." He tapped on his tablet, and a video feed appeared. It was timestamped 2 weeks ago. Claire, stepping into the lobby of the Riverview Towers, her designer bag slung over her shoulder, sunglasses perched on her nose. 10 minutes later, Ethan followed, glancing over his shoulder before heading toward the elevators. I watched in silence, my jaw tightening as the pieces began falling into place. "She told me she was at her sister's house," I said, my voice colder than I'd intended. Andre hesitated before responding. "Her sister was out of town that week, according to airline records. Miami, for a conference." I forced a slow, steady breath. Anger wasn't going to help me. Not yet. "What else do we know?" Andre pulled up another screen. Rebecca Lane's initial analysis of Ethan's financials just came in. "It's worse than we thought." Rebecca and I connected later that evening over a secure video call. Her sharp, no-nonsense demeanor was exactly what I needed as she walked me through her findings. "Ethan's company is in trouble," she began, her voice clipped. "At least it should be. He's been funneling money into shell companies for years, masking losses with fake profits and inflated project values. The whole thing reeks of fraud." She shared her screen, pointing out specific transactions. "Look here. These construction projects? Half of them exist only on paper. And the other half? They're grossly overvalued." I rubbed my temples, a dull ache forming behind my eyes. "Why would he need to do this?" I asked. Rebecca's expression didn't change. "Because he's running out of money, Michael. And if this scheme collapses, everyone tied to him, including your parents and their retirement fund, is going down with him." Underscore. It wasn't just Ethan's finances that were unraveling. Claire's so-called appointments at the fertility clinic were another carefully constructed lie. According to Andre, her phone never once connected to the clinic's Wi-Fi network. Instead, the same pattern emerged: pings from Riverview Towers. "She's been using the fertility clinic as a cover for months," Andre said as we reviewed the data. I nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over me. "And Ethan's the reason, isn't he?" Andre hesitated before responding. "That's what the evidence suggests." Later that night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the collection of data Andre had compiled. Patterns, timestamps, locations. Every piece fit together with painful clarity. Claire's betrayal wasn't a careless mistake. It was deliberate, calculated, and thorough. I pulled up a private folder on my computer, opening an image of us taken at a dinner party just a few months ago. Her smile had seemed genuine, her laughter infectious. I thought I knew her. I didn't realize how wrong I was. By the following morning, my plan was already in motion. "Rebecca," I said during another secure call, "I need you to go deeper. I want every transaction Ethan's company has made over the last 5 years. If there's even a hint of fraud, I need to know." "Understood," she replied. "But be prepared, Michael. If what I've found so far is any indication, this rabbit hole goes deep." Meanwhile, Andre and I began setting up surveillance at home. "Are you sure about this?" Andre asked as his team installed cameras in key areas of the house. "Yes," I said firmly. "I need to know everything. If there's more to this than what we've already uncovered, I want proof." The cameras were discreet, blending seamlessly into the decor. They recorded in high resolution, with audio feeds routed to a secure server. Jordan, my lead technician, gave me a quick rundown as they finalized the setup. "We'll have full coverage," he said. "You'll be able to monitor in real time or review recordings as needed." I nodded, my expression unreadable. Claire returned home that evening, completely unaware of the changes. She breezed past me with her usual air of indifference, barely glancing up from her phone. "Long day?" she asked, her tone casual. "You could say that," I replied, watching as she disappeared into the bedroom. I waited until I was alone before accessing the live feed from the cameras. Watching her move through the house, seemingly oblivious, only solidified my resolve. Rebecca's next update came 2 days later, and it hit me like a freight train. "Michael, I've traced one of the shell companies Ethan's been using," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "It's connected to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The same accounts linked to those late-night logins you found." I leaned forward, my grip tightening on the edge of the desk. "So it's all connected," I said. "More than connected," Rebecca replied. "It's a house of cards. One wrong move, and the whole thing will collapse. But here's the kicker. It looks like Claire's been helping him move money." The words hit harder than I expected. "Do you have proof?" "I'm working on it," she said. "But if she is involved, it's subtle. Ethan's doing most of the heavy lifting." That night, I reviewed the footage from the house. Every conversation, every phone call, it was all recorded now. Claire's phone buzzed repeatedly, her voice carrying through the feed as she spoke with someone I couldn't quite identify. "We'll figure it out," she said. "He's too distracted with work to notice anything. Just stick to the plan." I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening as I realized just how deeply she was entrenched in Ethan's schemes. But they'd made a fatal mistake. In their arrogance, they underestimated me, and that was going to cost them everything. The truth has a way of creeping in, piece by piece, until there's nowhere left to hide. For days, I'd been combing through Rebecca's reports, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. The picture forming in front of me wasn't just a betrayal. It was a masterpiece of deceit. "Michael," Rebecca said during our latest call, her face illuminated by the glow of her computer screen, "I've traced multiple transactions tied to Ethan's shell companies. But it's not just his operation. It's the people he's roped into it." "What people?" I asked, though a part of me already knew. She hesitated, then shared her screen. "Your parents, specifically their retirement fund. Ethan's been using it as leverage to pull in secondary investors. It's one of the cornerstones of his Ponzi scheme." I felt the blood drain from my face as the reality sank in. "You're sure?" "I'm positive," she replied, her voice steady but filled with sympathy. "Your father's name appears on several high-profile transactions, likely to lend credibility. And your mother, well, let's just say she's been doing a lot of talking." Rebecca pulled up a series of emails, each more damning than the last. My mother's words stared back at me, a mix of praise for Ethan and thinly veiled criticism of me. "Ethan understands real business. Not like Michael and his tech obsession. He's a true visionary. I've told everyone at the club that investing with him is the smart move." My chest tightened as I read through the exchanges. They've been unknowingly feeding Ethan's scheme, blind to the cracks in his operation. And worse, they've been promoting him to their friends, dragging even more unsuspecting people into the web. Andre confirmed the personal betrayals later that day with a grim expression. "Your mother's been active in her social circles," he said, pulling up a report. "She's been recommending Ethan's investments to everyone she knows. It's created a ripple effect. We've tracked dozens of retirees who've followed her advice." I leaned back in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests. "Do they know what they're involved in?" "Not yet," Andre said carefully. "But the evidence we've gathered shows they've been manipulated as much as anyone else. Ethan's used their trust and their connections to pull this off." It was a bitter pill to swallow. My own parents, complicit in a scheme that could ruin countless lives, all because they trusted the wrong person. Meanwhile, the surveillance on Claire continued to deliver gut punches. It wasn't just the footage of her and Ethan entering and leaving his guest house. That alone was bad enough. No, it was the conversations we'd captured, the whispered phone calls, the plans made in hushed tones, that truly laid bare her betrayal. "I'm telling you, he's clueless," Claire said during one late-night call. "Michael's so obsessed with work, he doesn't even notice when I'm gone." A voice I recognized as Ethan's replied. Good. Let's keep it that way. We need a few more weeks to finalize everything. "In the house?" she asked. "It's taken care of," Ethan said. "Once the divorce is filed, we'll push for the equity and move everything into the new account." My hands tightened into fists as I listened to their casual dismantling of my life. Rebecca called again 2 days later, her tone more urgent than before. "Michael, I've dug deeper into Ethan's financials," she said. "And it's worse than we thought. He's not just skimming off investors, he's laundering money through offshore accounts." She shared another screen, this time showing a series of complex financial diagrams. "See these transfers? They're routing through shell companies in the Caymans, Singapore, and Dubai. It's all part of a larger operation." I studied the diagrams, my anger bubbling beneath the surface. "How much are we talking about?" "Millions," Rebecca said. "Maybe tens of millions. And based on what I've found, Claire's been playing a supporting role. Not directly, but enough to keep her hands dirty." That night, I sat in my office, staring at the files Rebecca had sent over. Every piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage, my friendships, and the trust I'd placed in the people closest to me. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was helping Ethan gut my life from the inside out, tearing apart everything I'd worked for while planning her escape. And Ethan, my best friend, hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd turned my family into pawns in his game, using their trust to prop up his crumbling empire. But if they thought I'd take this lying down, they were sorely mistaken. By the end of the week, Andre delivered the final piece of evidence. "We've got the surveillance footage from the Riverview Towers," he said, sliding a folder across my desk. Inside were still showing Claire and Ethan entering and exiting the building on multiple occasions. But it was the timestamps that hit the hardest. Every single one lined up with the times Claire claimed she was at her sister's or attending appointments. "She's been lying to you for months," Andre said, his voice low. I nodded, my expression unreadable. "And Ethan? He's worse. We've intercepted encrypted messages between him and several high-profile investors. He's trying to move money offshore before the house of cards collapses." "Not on my watch," I said, my voice sharp. "Keep tracking everything. I want every transaction, every movement, every word." Andre nodded, but before he left, he hesitated. "Michael, are you okay?" I met his gaze, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I will be, but not until this is over." As I sat alone in the dim glow of my monitors that night, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The evidence was damning. The betrayals were clear. But now, I had a plan. Claire and Ethan thought they'd covered their tracks, that they could outsmart me and walk away unscathed. But they underestimated me, and they were about to pay for it. Betrayal has a way of sharpening the mind. The initial sting fades, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous: clarity. For weeks, I'd been unraveling the web Claire and Ethan had spun around me. Now it was time to act. I sat with Andre and Rebecca in my office, the three of us poring over documents and surveillance feeds. A new player had joined the game, FBI agent Sarah Blake. With her no-nonsense demeanor and sharp instincts, Sarah brought a level of expertise we desperately needed. "This isn't just a small-time Ponzi scheme," Sarah said, her tone crisp as she tapped a stack of files. "Ethan's tied to international money laundering operations. His shell companies are funneling millions across borders, and he's got connections to some very dangerous people." "Perfect," I said, leaning back in my chair, "because when we take him down, I want it to be thorough." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready for this? Personal involvement can get messy." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "Messy's already here. Now it's about control." The first step was fortifying my own home. Andre's team worked overnight, installing undetectable cameras and microphones throughout the house. Every corner, every room, nothing was left uncovered. Jordan, my lead technician, gave me a rundown of the setup. The cameras are hidden in everyday objects, light fixtures, picture frames, even a clock. They stream directly to a secure server, so you'll have real-time access. "And the audio?" I asked. "Crystal clear," he replied. "We've also set up motion-activated triggers. If anyone tries to tamper with the system, we'll know immediately." Claire returned the next evening, blissfully unaware of the surveillance web surrounding her. She walked through the door with her usual detached air, tossing her bag onto the couch. "Another late night at work?" she asked, her voice dripping with disinterest. "You could say that," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't notice the way my eyes lingered on her phone as she set it on the counter. The first breakthrough came 2 nights later. Sitting in my office, I watched a live feed from the kitchen as Claire made a phone call. "Everything's ready," she said, her voice low. "He's out of the house most nights now, and I've been pulling the financials together. Ethan says we'll finalize the transfers soon." My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for emotions. Rebecca's next discovery provided the linchpin for our plan. "I've tracked a series of offshore transactions tied to Ethan's accounts," she said during a late-night call. "The amounts are increasing, and the timing aligns with the engagement party he's planning." "What's the endgame?" I asked. "He's setting up his exit," Rebecca replied. "Once the party's over, he'll transfer the remaining funds and disappear." I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. Not if we get to him first. The final piece came from Sarah. "We've been monitoring Ethan's communication networks," she said during a strategy session. "He's invited several key players to the engagement party. Investors, board members, even international contacts. It's the perfect setup for him and for us." I nodded, my mind racing. "Then we'll use it." Sarah tilted her head, studying me. "You've thought this through, haven't you?" "Every detail," I replied. "They think they're untouchable. It's time to show them how wrong they are." The trap was simple in theory, but required surgical precision in execution. First, we fed false confidence to Claire and Ethan. I deliberately stayed late at work, creating the illusion of distance and distraction. "I've got a late meeting tonight," I mentioned casually over breakfast one morning. "Potential clients from Europe, different time zones." Claire barely looked up from her coffee. "Don't worry about me. I'll find something to keep me busy." I kept my face neutral, even as anger bubbled beneath the surface. The night of the engagement party arrived, and everything was in place. Andre and Sarah coordinated the final stages from our temporary command center, a secure location outfitted with monitors displaying live feeds from the event. Rebecca's forensic analysis had uncovered enough evidence to freeze Ethan's accounts. Sarah's team was ready to move the moment we had what we needed. "The cameras are live," Andre said, gesturing to the screens. I stared at the images of Claire and Ethan, smiling and laughing as they mingled with guests. They looked like the perfect couple. "Michael," Sarah said, her voice pulling me back. "You ready?" I nodded, my expression hardening. "Let's end this." Back at home, the surveillance system caught Claire making one last call before leaving for the party. "I'll meet you at the house after," she told Ethan. "We'll celebrate properly once this is all behind us." Her words were a perfect snapshot of her arrogance, her confidence, and her lies. But what she didn't know was that every word, every move, was being captured and routed to secure servers. The engagement party was lavish, as expected. Ethan spared no expense, using the event to bolster his image and distract from the cracks forming beneath the surface. As guests sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries, Andre's team tracked every digital interaction. Every phone call, every email, it was all being intercepted in real time. "They're getting sloppy," Andre muttered as another flag transaction appeared on the screen. "Good," I said, my voice cold. "The more they rush, the easier it is to bring them down." The final moments of the night unfolded in slow motion. Ethan made his way to the stage, a champagne flute in hand, ready to deliver a speech that would cement his image as a charismatic visionary. But before he could begin, Sarah's team moved in. "Ethan Shaw," Sarah said, her voice carrying through the ballroom, "you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." Gasps rippled through the crowd as FBI agents descended, their movements swift and precise. Across the room, Claire froze, her face pale as she realized what was happening. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding as the scene played out exactly as planned. Back at home, the footage from the surveillance system completed the picture. Claire's calls, her meetings, her lies, It was all there, neatly cataloged and ready to be used. She returned home hours later, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. Care to explain this? I asked, laying out the stills and transcripts on the kitchen counter. For the first time, Claire's mask slipped. You don't understand, she stammered. Ethan, he promised. I understand perfectly, I said, cutting her off. You thought you could play me. You thought I wouldn't see through you. But you were wrong. The trap had closed, but the battle was far from over. Claire and Ethan had underestimated me. They believed their lies could shield them. Their arrogance could protect them. But they'd forgotten one simple truth. In the digital age, nothing stays hidden forever. The engagement party was a masterpiece of deceit and excess, just like Ethan himself. The Riverview Grand Hall, with its towering crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, hummed with a murmur of laughter and conversation. It was a setting designed to impress, to distract from the rot beneath the surface. I watched the scene unfold from the FBI's mobile command center parked discreetly 2 blocks away. The feeds on the monitors displayed every corner of the event in stunning clarity. There he is, Sarah said, pointing to one of the screens. Ethan moved through the crowd, his trademark charm on full display as he shook hands and exchanged pleasantries. Beside him, Claire played her part perfectly, her laugh light, her smile radiant. To anyone else, they looked like the perfect couple. To me, they looked like criminals moments away from their reckoning. Andre leaned over my shoulder, his voice low. We've got new activity on the network. They're trying to transfer funds from the offshore accounts. Let them think they're succeeding, I replied. Every transaction is being redirected to the FBI's honeypot accounts. They're digging their own graves. Rebecca's voice crackled through the headset. The investors are getting nervous. A few of them are starting to ask questions about the returns. Good, Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the monitors. The more cracks that form tonight, the better. Ethan took to the stage as planned, a champagne flute in hand, the room falling silent as he prepared to deliver his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth and confident. Tonight is not just a celebration of love. It's a celebration of vision, partnership, and opportunity. Behind the scenes, the FBI team moved into position. Andre monitored the feeds, his fingers flying across the keyboard to ensure every system stayed online. Wait for my signal, Sarah said into her comms, her tone sharp and controlled. I stood silently, my hands clenched at my sides as Ethan continued his speech, oblivious to the storm closing in around him. The signal came at precisely 8:47 p.m. Sarah's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. Ethan Shaw, this ends now. Gasps rippled through the crowd as FBI agents emerged from the periphery, their presence swift and undeniable. Ethan Shaw, Sarah continued, stepping forward, her badge glinting under the chandelier light. You are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Ethan's confident facade cracked as the words registered. His champagne flute trembled in his hand before slipping and shattering against the floor. Claire's reaction was even more telling. She grabbed Ethan's arm, her eyes darting toward the nearest exit. We have to go, she hissed, her voice barely audible over the commotion. But the exits were covered, every route meticulously sealed off by the FBI. Andre's voice came through my earpiece. She's panicking. We got her on camera trying to delete files from her phone. It won't matter, I said coldly. Everything's already backed up on the servers. Ethan made a break for it, shoving past stunned guests in a desperate attempt to escape. He didn't get far. 2 agents intercepted him near the main entrance, forcing him to the ground as the crowd recoiled in shock. Claire wasn't far behind. She stumbled in her designer heels, nearly falling as she reached the side door. It was locked. Panic overtook her as she banged on the door, her once perfect composure crumbling. This is impossible, she screamed. We had everything planned. I stepped into the room then, my presence drawing every eye. Claire turned to me, her face a mix of anger and fear. You, she spat, her voice trembling. You did this. I walked toward her, my expression calm, though my heart pounded in my chest. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" I said, my voice low, but carrying enough weight to silence the room. Claire's defiance faltered. "You don't understand." "No, Claire," I interrupted. "You don't understand. You thought you could manipulate me, lie to me, steal from me. But you underestimated me. And now, you're going to face the consequences." As FBI agents led Ethan and Claire away, the crowd erupted into chaos. Investors demanded answers, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of anger and confusion. Rebecca's voice came through my headset. "The accounts are frozen. Every transaction is locked. There's no way for them to recover the funds." "Good," I replied, my eyes fixed on Ethan as he was escorted out in handcuffs. The night ended with the unraveling of everything Ethan and Claire had built. Their schemes, their lies, their carefully constructed facades. It all crumbled under the weight of truth. I stood alone in the now empty ballroom, the echoes of the night's chaos fading into silence. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would unfold. But as I stared at the remnants of the party, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served. And while the cost was high, my marriage, my friendships, my trust in the people I thought I knew it was worth it. Because in the end, the truth always wins. The day Ethan was sentenced, I watched the proceedings in silence from the back of the courtroom. He shuffled and wearing the stark orange of a federal prisoner, his once confident posture replaced by a defeated slouch. The judge read the charges in a tone that was all business. Fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Ethan barely reacted as the sentence was handed down. 25 years with no chance of early release. I didn't feel triumph as the gavel struck, just a hollow sense of finality. Claire's case followed shortly after. She took the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted Ethan's schemes and her role in them. Her lawyers had negotiated a deal with the prosecution, full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. I sat through it all, unmoved as she portrayed herself as a pawn, someone swept up in Ethan's manipulations. I knew better. Claire wasn't innocent. She had been a willing participant in the lies, the theft, and the betrayal. But in the end, the evidence she provided was invaluable to the case. She received 5 years in prison, a sentence that felt light considering the damage she'd helped cause. As the bailiff led her away, she glanced back at me, her expression unreadable. I didn't look away. My parents, however, had no court to protect them from their own consequences. The FBI's investigation had unearthed their deep involvement in Ethan's schemes, not as masterminds, but as enablers. My father's name had lent credibility to Ethan's fraudulent projects, while my mother's relentless social promotion had drawn in dozens of investors. Their financial ruin was swift and brutal. Retirement funds? Gone. Social standing? Obliterated. The same country club circles where my mother once reigned were now filled with whispers about her downfall. "Do you hate us?" my mother asked one afternoon during one of our increasingly strained conversations. We sat in her modest apartment, a far cry from the sprawling home she once proudly displayed. "No," I said, though the word didn't come easily. "But I can't forgive you either." "Not yet." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't argue. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't want to know," I corrected. "There's a difference." In the wake of the trial, the ruins of Ethan's empire were dismantled piece by piece. His accounts were seized, his property sold off, and his business holdings dissolved. One property, however, caught my attention, the Riverview Towers guest house. The site of so many betrayals and lies, it had become a symbol of everything Ethan stood for. It didn't take long to decide what to do with it. 3 months later, the Riverview guest house reopened, but not as a luxury apartment. Instead, it became the headquarters for a new project I'd quietly started, the Sentinel Foundation for Fraud Prevention and Recovery. The foundation was designed to help victims of financial crime rebuild their lives. The guest house itself was transformed into temporary housing for those displaced by scams like Ethan's. "This place has history," I told Sarah during one of her visits. "It feels right to turn it into something good." She nodded, her respect evident. "You've turned destruction into hope." "That's rare." The foundation became my focus, a way to channel the anger and grief that had simmered in me since the betrayals. Rebecca joined as the head of financial analysis, her expertise critical in identifying new fraud patterns and helping victims recover stolen assets. Andre remained my closest ally, overseeing the foundation's security systems and ensuring that no one would ever exploit the vulnerable on our watch. Work kept me busy, but healing wasn't something I could schedule. The scars left by Claire's betrayal ran deep. Some nights, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments that led to our collapse. The lies, the deceit, the cold calculations that replaced love and trust. It was a weight I wasn't sure I'd ever shed completely. But there were moments of light, too. Small victories. A family reunited after recovering their savings. An elderly man who'd lost everything to a scam finding a place to start again. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were people. And helping them reminded me that not all was lost. I also found unexpected solace in Sarah. Our paths crossed often during the foundation's early days. Her expertise invaluable in navigating the legal and bureaucratic hurdles that came with fraud recovery. But it was the quiet moments, the coffee shared after long meetings, the conversations that drifted from work to life, that began to rebuild my faith and connection. "You're not what I expected," she said one evening as we stood on the guest house balcony, the city lights stretching before us. "What did you expect?" I asked. "A broken man," she said. "But instead, you've built something unbreakable." Months turned into a year, and the foundation grew. We expanded to new cities, new countries, partnering with organizations that shared our mission. The Riverview Guest House, once a monument to betrayal, had become a haven for hope. As for me, I was learning to move forward. Slowly, painfully, but with purpose. The past would always be a part of me, a shadow I couldn't entirely escape. But it didn't have to define me. And as I stood on the balcony of the guest house one evening, watching the sun set over the city, I realized something. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Time has a way of softening edges. Not erasing them, but dulling the sharpness just enough to let you move forward. In the years since Ethan's schemes imploded, my life had shifted in ways I couldn't have imagined. The Sentinel Foundation had grown from a single project at the Riverview Guest House into a global network of fraud prevention and recovery centers. We operated in over a dozen countries, partnering with law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, and advocacy groups to combat the kinds of crimes that nearly destroyed me. It was more than a career now, it was a calling. Sarah and I worked together almost daily. Her transition from FBI field agent to fraud prevention consultant had been seamless. Where I excelled in data analysis and pattern recognition, she brought a sharp, strategic mind that knew how to anticipate the moves of even the most sophisticated criminals. "Another offshore scheme," she said one morning, dropping a file onto my desk. The details were all too familiar. Shell companies, falsified invoices, and a trail of money that disappeared into the labyrinth of international accounts. "These people never learn," I muttered, flipping through the pages. "No," Sarah replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "But luckily we do." Together, we had become a formidable team. Professionally, the foundation was thriving. Personally, things weren't as simple. My relationship with my parents had been rocky in the aftermath of Ethan's trial. The weight of their complicity, however unintentional, had created a rift that felt impossible to bridge. But as the years passed, they began to change. My father, once a stoic and distant figure, poured his energy into documenting his experiences with Ethan's schemes. He created training materials for law enforcement and financial advisors, sharing the lessons he'd learned too late. "It's the least I can do," he told me during one of our rare dinners together. "If it helps even one person avoid what we went through, it's worth it." My mother's transformation was even more striking. She had traded her country club luncheons for victim advocacy, spending her days counseling people who had been devastated by fraud. "I used to think appearances were everything," she admitted one afternoon as we walked through the guest house. "But they're not. Not even close." I nodded, my voice quiet but firm. "No, they're not." Despite the progress, there were moments when the past reared its head. One afternoon, I visited the guest house and found an older man sitting in the lobby, clutching a faded photograph. He looked lost, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Can I help you?" I asked, taking a seat beside him. He showed me the photo, a picture of his family, now fractured by a scam that had stolen their savings. "They told me it was a sure thing," he said, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to give my grandchildren a better future." I felt a pang of familiarity in his words, the echoes of my own experience stirring something deep inside. "We'll help you rebuild," I promised him. "It's not over." Sarah watched as I worked with him, her expression soft. "You're good at this," she said later, as we walked to the parking lot. "It's not about being good," I replied. "It's about knowing what it feels like. That pain, that betrayal. It doesn't go away, but it doesn't have to define you either." She smiled, slipping her arm through mine as we headed to our cars. "You've turned it into something bigger." "That's rare, Michael." Our professional partnership had grown into something more over the years. A bond built on trust, respect, and a shared sense of purpose. We hadn't labeled it, but there was an ease between us that felt natural, unforced. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sarah stayed late at my office. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked, her voice light but tinged with curiosity. I leaned back in my chair, considering her question. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I don't know what that looks like yet." She nodded, her gaze steady. "Whatever it is, you'll figure it out. You always do." The foundation's work took us to places I never imagined. We traveled to conferences in London, Dubai, and Singapore, sharing our strategies with global leaders in finance and law enforcement. Each trip reinforced how much there was still to do, and how much progress we'd made. 5 years ago, this wouldn't have been possible, Rebecca said during a panel discussion in Tokyo. But thanks to Sentinel Systems, we've stopped over $300 million in fraud this year alone. Hearing those numbers didn't fill me with pride, it filled me with determination. "It's a start," I replied, "but there's still more to uncover." Back home, the Riverview Guest House had become a beacon of hope. The once exclusive apartment complex now housed families rebuilding their lives, its walls echoing with the sounds of children's laughter and quiet determination. On the building's rooftop garden, a plaque read, "Injustice thrives in silence. Together, we rise above." I'd written those words during one of my lowest moments, unsure if they'd ever hold meaning. Now, they were a mantra for everything we'd built. One evening, I stood on the rooftop, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. Sarah joined me, a cup of coffee in her hand. "Long day?" she asked, handing me the cup. "They're all long," I replied with a small smile. She laughed softly, leaning against the railing. "So what's the verdict, Mr. Cordova? Have we made a dent in the world yet?" I looked at her, the woman who had been my anchor through the chaos, and then out at the city we'd worked so hard to protect. "A dent," I said, "and maybe a little more." The past still lingered, but it no longer weighed me down. The betrayals, the losses, they had shaped me, but they didn't define me. I was building something better, for the victims who needed a second chance, for the family I was learning to forgive, and for myself. 10 years can feel like a lifetime, or just the blink of an eye. I stood in my office, now perched on the 40th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise, watching the city lights flicker against the twilight. The world had changed in the last decade, and so had I. Behind me, Sentinel's logo gleamed on the glass wall, a symbol of everything we'd built. What had started as a single fraud prevention project had become a global force, reshaping how financial institutions and law enforcement tackle crime. But tonight, as I stood in the quiet hum of success, my mind wasn't on accolades or growth charts. It was on the journey that had brought me here, and the people who had made it possible. The Sentinel Foundation now operated in over 20 countries, its programs ranging from fraud detection systems to victim support services. Our partnerships with governments and corporations had saved billions, but the numbers weren't what mattered most. It was the stories, like the single mother in Seattle who rebuilt her life after losing everything to a scam, or the retired teacher in London who uncovered a fraudulent charity siphoning donations from his community. Each life we touched was a reminder of why I'd started this journey in the first place. My parents had found their own paths to redemption. My father, once a man of few words, now traveled the country, speaking at financial seminars about the dangers of blind trust. His presentations were raw and honest, offering insights from a man who had seen both sides of the coin. Trust is a gift, he often said, but it should never be blind. My mother had become a cornerstone of the Sentinel Foundation's victim advocacy program. She had transformed her guilt into action, mentoring countless individuals through the painful process of rebuilding. It's never too late to make things right, she told me during one of our monthly calls. I just wish I'd learned that sooner. Sarah's influence on my life had been profound. What began as a professional partnership grew into something deeper, steadier. We married quietly one autumn afternoon, surrounded by close friends and family in the Riverview Guesthouse's rooftop garden, a space that had come to symbolize hope and renewal. Our children, Daniel and Grace, brought a joy I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Their laughter filled our home, a welcome contrast to the silence that once echoed through its halls. Sarah and I often worked late into the night, balancing our professional commitments with the chaos of parenthood. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. You've come a long way, Sarah said one evening, as we reviewed another batch of foundation reports. So have you, I replied, meeting her warm gaze. The Riverview Guesthouse had become a symbol of transformation. Once a haven for deceit, it now stood as a sanctuary for those seeking justice and a second chance. Each year, we hosted a memorial event there, honoring victims of fraud and celebrating the progress made in their recovery. The rooftop garden where I'd once stood alone was now filled with laughter, stories, and a shared sense of purpose. I often found myself wandering through the garden during quieter moments, reflecting on the twists and turns that had brought me here. The financial world had changed too. Sentinel's fraud detection systems had become the gold standard, used by banks and governments worldwide. Rebecca's contributions had been instrumental. Her relentless pursuit of data-driven solutions had exposed countless schemes, earning her a reputation as one of the most respected forensic accountants in the field. Andre, ever the stalwart, now led Sentinel's global security operations, his work ensuring that no scheme, no matter how intricate, could escape our notice. I still remember when it was just us in a cramped office, he joked during a recent meeting. And now you've got an empire, I replied with a grin. As the years passed, I learned to let go of the anger that once defined me. Claire had faded into the background of my life, her actions a distant memory rather than an open wound. She served her sentence and disappeared from the public eye, leaving behind a legacy of caution rather than connection. Ethan, too, became a shadow of his former self. Reports from his prison indicated a man broken by his own greed, his charisma replaced by bitterness. I no longer thought about them with hatred. Instead, they were reminders of what unchecked ambition and betrayal could do, and of how far I'd come. One evening, Daniel and Grace sat on the couch, flipping through a scrapbook Sarah had put together. "Dad," Daniel asked, his young voice filled with curiosity, "is it true you used to catch bad guys?" I smiled, sitting beside him. "It's true, but it wasn't just me. It was a team, a lot of smart, hardworking people." Grace tilted her head, her eyes wide. "But why do people do bad things?" I thought about that for a moment, their innocent faces waiting for an answer. "Because they think they won't get caught," I said finally. But the truth always comes out, one way or another. Later that night, I found Sarah on the balcony, watching the stars. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked, her voice soft. "All the time," I replied, slipping my arm around her. She leaned into me, her warmth a quiet reassurance. "And now," I said, looking out at the city lights, "I think about what's next." As the years continued to pass, I found peace in the rhythm of my new life. The Sentinel Foundation, my family, and the lives we touched, they were all proof that betrayal doesn't have to define the future. Justice had been served, not just in courtrooms, but in the countless lives rebuilt through our work. And in the end, I'd learned the most important lesson of all. Betrayal may break you, but it's what you build from the pieces that truly defines you.